Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the almighty Zeus build, the best sword build and the best warrior build I have made for this game ever. It deals so massive damage with all your abilities, 11 million hunter, easily over 20 million warrior or up to 80 million on polemarks. You can normal assassinate any mercenary in the game, you can overrun them, that's absolutely no problem. If this build would be any better, it will also make your coffee and make your homework as well. There will be two versions for this build, a hyper mode build which only focuses on the most damage and also a god mode build which has 100% melee resistance, easily the best 100% melee resistance warrior build I have made so far. All the damage values are shown here from the hyper mode, but the god mode has almost the same damage and is still able to overrun mercenaries on nightmare. But let's check out the damage values here. We have 1.3 million with the light attack and we have 2.1 million with the heavy attack when we attack from behind in the hyper mode. Of course, these numbers increase when we attack from behind or overnight. With the charged heavy attack we will deal over 6.4 million damage, that can be much more overnight as well. And the whole build and everything you see here does not even use armor penetration. So when you use armor penetration you could even deal more damage than that. 3.5 million damage with Ring of Chaos, not even using armor penetration. 12 million with Fury of the Bloodline and 24 million with the overpower attack. That's the maximum here when you use the exact same build as I do. And of course we also have RS Madness with 10 million damage activation damage in the Greek world, and the normal RS Madness heavy and light attacks will also be around 1.6 million each. That is enough to easily kill mercenaries and deal a lot of damage. But that's nothing compared to polemarks. When you hit polemarks from behind with RS Madness you will deal over 37 million damage. And the same when you use all your normal attacks. Ring of Chaos 12 million damage, charged heavy attack 21 million damage, Fury of the Bloodline will deal over 40 million and the overpower attack will deal over 80 million damage when you hit a polemark either from behind or when he is sleeping. But sadly this is only working for polemark, so if you want a really cool thing to show off to your friends and use it on a polemark, that is totally awesome. Then we also have our hunter abilities with 4 million damage, multi-shot with over 7 million damage with the devastating shot, and with the right conditions during the night you can even deal over 11 million damage with the predator shot, not even using armor penetration, so that could be 12 million damage easily when you have that. Of course, rush assassination is no problem to use on any enemy and any mercenary as well. You can normal assassinate every enemy and mercenary here in the game, that is no problem. That is the best warrior build that can overrun mercenaries at the same time by still maintaining the most possible, the highest possible warrior damage. And you can even overrun them by using a heavy attack on your host. That will be a one-shot for every mercenary who dares to stay in your way. Now before we go into the inventory, a big shout out to my super fans Black Susano, Grateful Golem and Goose. Thank you for your incredible support. If you also want to get a shout out, personal build advice, wallpapers, personal private chats and more, then check out the membership perks or the Patreon perks. And also thank you for all the others for your generous donations, it's really helping out the channel a lot. In the inventory we see we have 173,000 warrior damage with a sword build that also have 511,000 assassin damage, and that is enough together with our high crit multiplicator to overrun mercenaries here even on nightmare. I wanted to create a warrior build with sword which has the most warrior damage but still be able to overrun mercenaries here with normal assassinations. And that is what this build does perfectly. When we check out the damage per engraving for this build, then we see that 30% damage with swords deals the most damage, closely followed by 100% critical damage at full health. Normally critical damage at full health is most at the top, but in this case we already have a very high critical damage multiplier. And when that happens, the other multipliers become more valuable, so this time damage with swords actually overtook critical damage at full health for the number 1 spot. It's not always the highest percentage value what does the most damage, but it really depends where it is placed and how it is calculated with that specific value. And in that regard the multiplicators, which are critical damage and damage with swords or damage with another weapon type, are the biggest damage drivers compared to only the additive bonuses, which are warrior damage and fire damage etc. Of course, all the calculations can be found in the description of this video as usual. This build will use two perfect epic swords with warrior damage, critical and damage swords, and on the left sword I opted for damage becomes fire damage because I simply love having the permanent fire on my weapon. There are several reasons why I do this, because I don't want to activate a fire and every ability at the same time, because fire is also amplifying all your abilities, Ring of Chaos, Fury, Overpower. So if I simply use one ability, I would also have to use fire, so activating two abilities at the same time, and that is really annoying, and it also runs out every time in a fight. You can also not use it on a horse, it makes a loud noise, it is alerting enemies, so there are several reasons, and I really like to have this permanently applied. Normally I would have engraved armor penetration on the left sword, but I chose fire damage because the difference between fire damage and armor penetration is really not so high. Of course, if you compare it between armor penetration and no armor penetration, the difference is 20%. We have calculated that in our best spare build in the last video. But when we compare armor penetration with the damage becomes fire damage, with additional 60% fire damage, we have 1.5 million damage with the light attack with armor penetration, 6.5 with the charged heavy, and 1.8 million with a normal arrow shot. And when we apply weapon damage becomes fire damage, which will be exactly 60% here, we see that the difference will be not as high as if we don't use anything other at all. With the fire damage applied, we still have 6.4 million with the charged heavy attack, we have 1.4 million with the light attack, and we still have 1.6 million with a normal arrow shot. So when we compare these numbers, we have only a 2% damage increase with the charged heavy attack, we have a 7% damage increase with the light attack, and we have a 13% damage increase for normal arrow shots when we use armor penetration over 60% fire damage. So when we use armor penetration, we also have to take into consideration that on attacks that already have a very high armor penetration, like charged heavy attack or other strong attacks, the effect is much smaller than on the normal light attacks and normal arrow shots. Of course, you can still argue that you can always activate fire manually additional to your armor penetration, and then of course you will have the most damage, but having permanent fire is actually not as bad compared to armor penetration when we have at least 60% fire or even more than that. Again, similar to the spare build, it's totally up to you what to engrave here on the left weapon. You can use weapon damage become fire damage, weapon damage become poison damage, or armor penetration for the most damage if you want to. On the other perfect epic sword we have warrior damage, damage sword, and critical damage as well, and here we engrave the convert 50% warrior damage bonuses to all damage. All these epic items here in the build can be found at blacksmith using the reload trick or at random loot. The Bighorn Bow is the only item in this build that can only be acquired from the Helix store or when you get really lucky with the Olympian gifts. But it is really cheap. If you still have your free Helix credits, then you can still get the Bighorn Bow for free. Again, the Bighorn Bow is a blue item, but it adds all its 6000 DPS to your melee damage, because it is a glitched bow, so 6000 more melee damage to your left weapon compared to your right weapon. You see the difference at the bottom, 173,000 compared to 106,000, that is the effect of the Bighorn Bow. If you use any other bow, then your warrior damage will be stuck around 106,000, maybe a little over 110,000 if you have a warrior damage bow, but that's it. You will not be able to get these high damages here with 170,000. So the Bighorn Bow is a real game changer and I recommend you to check it out. On the Bighorn Bow I engraved the 100% damage increase but health capped to 25%, because that has a reason. When you play on Nightmare, even with full health, 2 hits will definitely kill you. So when you compare that to using the Falx engraving, there are also 2 hits that will kill you, because at the first hit you will always be at 1% health point. The game will not let you one hit by your enemies. So having the Falx or not doesn't even make a difference when you go Nightmare. On our helmet we have warrior damage, damage with swords, 50% critical damage and 20% critical chance while full health. Normally we would have 20% additional damage with swords and daggers here instead of the 50% crit damage, but since we need the crit damage to overrun mercenaries here on Nightmare, we will just replace the 20% damage with swords and daggers with 50% crit damage. The damage loss isn't really so big for our warrior damage, because 50% crit damage is still relatively good, but we really need that to overrun mercenaries, and that makes a big difference here for our assassin damage. The arms are perfect warrior bracers with warrior damage, 100% crit damage, crit chance and 50% crit damage. And here then on the belt as well, warrior damage, 100% crit damage while full health and 10% crit chance. And we engrave the 5% crit chance and 25% critical damage while full health from the Nemean Lion set. If you don't have that, then you can engrave 20% warrior damage here instead, but then you will also have to use the copycat sword to make up the loss of the crit chance. The hyper mode set will have 95% crit chance when you do it exactly as shown here, but I think that is exactly the right amount. You don't have to be at a 100% at all costs, because you have to consider what you will lose when you will be at 100%. So if you lose 50% crit damage or even 100% crit damage when you be at 100%, that is not really optimal. So just giving away 5% crit chance for another 50% crit damage is a good deal if you ask me, and that's a kind of a paradigm shift that we won't be at 100% every time with these new best warrior builds. We will just be at 95%, but even get more damage than before. On the torso we then use warrior damage, 50% crit damage, then 20% assassin damage and 20% warrior damage. If you want to get more warrior damage, then of course you could also use 10% all damage instead of the 20% assassin damage, but I guarantee you that you really want to have these 20% assassin damage to be able to overrun mercenaries. On the boots we then have warrior damage, 100% critical damage, 20% crit chance, and we engrave another warrior damage on it. In order to engrave another 20% warrior damage on a warrior item, you have to upgrade it to the maximum 20%, and the engraving must not be on second or third position. On our summary page we have 368% warrior damage, 314% assassin damage, that's all we need. 120% damage to sword, again we sacrificed 20% for 50% more crit damage, therefore we have 750% crit damage at 95% critical chance. That is absolutely okay. 95% means that every 20th hit will not be a critical hit, but most times it will be still so strong that you won't even notice it. Then we have another 60% additional fire damage, which is always automatically applied, absolutely no resistances here in this variant, and a lot of adrenaline bonuses. Of course that will be much different when we check out the Godmode build now. The Zeus Godmode build has 150,000 warrior damage, 511,000 assassin damage and a little bit less critical damage. On the left sword we engrave 30% damage while full health. We need that additional damage to be able to still overrun mercenaries at Nightmare even with a reduced critical damage multiplier. If you don't have that engraving, then you have to use 20% assassin damage. The right sword is unchanged, and also the Bighorn Bow still has the 100% damage increase. That build will be at 90% crit chance, but if you want you can make it 100%. If you drop the 30% damage here on the sword and place the 100% damage on the sword, then you can engrave 10% crit chance on the bow instead. You will still be able to overrun mercenaries perfectly on lower difficulties, but it is not guaranteed on Nightmare anymore when you do that. For our helmet we use the Oxesia's Helm of Darkness. That is a special helmet that only occurs every 42 weeks from a weekly mercenary. The last time was on June 23rd, so you have to count 42 weeks up from June 23rd, and then you know when the weekly mercenary with the helmet will return. So if there are no special event in the meantime, then you will rather use the Spartan Javelin, because it will take too long for the helmet to return. It will definitely not return before Valhalla unless there's another special event. Then on the arms we replace the 50% crit damage with a melee resistance engraving, and on the belt we do the same. We replace the last engraving with a 30% melee resistance. That way we will get 100% melee resistance, 3 times 30% plus 10% from the Masteries. The torso and the boots are unchanged in this variant, and all in all you will have 625% critical damage compared to the initial 750%. So you lose 125% critical damage in return of getting 100% melee resistance. In terms of ability points, you will need around 184 ability points to make this build, at least in the basic version. You should start off with 6th Sense, then put 2 points here on Arrow Master. That unlocks your elemental arrows, either fire or poison, whatever you want to use. Then I would recommend you to go for multi-shot, then devastating shot, and if you want to, you can also adopt Predator Shot. A must-have ability, however, is Archery Master. That refills your first adrenaline segment. Then go for 1 point here on the Overpower Bow Strike. That is bugged, so I wouldn't use it, but that unlocks the Ghost Arrows. If you don't need the Ghost Arrows, however, then you can save all these 4 points. For the warrior tree, you should go for the charged heavy attack. That exactly triples your heavy damage. So when you make 2 million with the heavy attack, then you make over 6 million with the charged heavy attack. So in fact it is 300% damage, not 150%. Then pick up all the passive bonuses here with Weapons Master, more warrior damage, more crit chance, Gear Master, more armor. And then you can choose here to put either 1 point on Flaming Sack or 3 points. When you have the permanent fire on your weapon, then you only need 1 point. When you want to activate it manually, then you need 3 points here. That unlocks the Fire Mastery, which gives you additional 40% fire damage, which is really nice. That simply boosts your damage output. The overpower attacks will be the strongest attack in your build with 24 million, but also unlock Ares Madness. That is a really great ability that deals up to 10 million damage for the activation damage and can easily blast off all your enemies around you. If you have Fury, then also go for Fury of the Bloodline. That will refill 4 adrenaline bars. Ring of Chaos together with Fire, an incredible ability. I would really recommend you to use it if you haven't done it anyway. And then of course a second wind to refill your health if you are ever in trouble. But of course we'll also refill our health when we deal damage, that is also possible. Then go for Shadow Assassin and Rush Assassination, Hero Strike as usual, and Stealth Master that increases our out of combat damage overnight. For the Masteries in the basic variant, I only invested 12 points here on crit chance to get 4%, another 12 points on crit damage. That will in total give us 93% critical chance, but of course you can increase it if you have more than that. You can also go for warrior damage. I skipped that because I wanted to make it with as least points as possible, but of course invest in warrior damage if you have the points. Very important is then 10 points here on melee resistance to get the 100% melee resistance. Invest a couple of points here on armor penetration if you want to. All other points are then invested in the Assassin tab because we really want to overrun mercenaries even on Nightmare, so we rather go for Assassin damage instead of warrior damage. Of course if we want to increase our warrior damage, then the best multiplier is damage with swords, so I put definitely points here on damage with swords rather than warrior damage. Of course if you have more points here than 180, then also go for warrior damage and max out warrior damage. But for the priority I picked damage with swords over warrior damage here, and I picked Assassin damage over warrior damage because I want to make sure you can still overrun mercenaries even in the low point variant. Then of course invest as much as possible into crit chance and critical damage while full health, and also go for the points here on damage while full health because that is also amplifying our assassin damage as well. Of course if you have more points than 180 or 200 points, then you don't have to worry about any priorities, then simply max out all the crit chance, crit damage. Then go for headshot damage, and here 12 points each on the other hunter abilities. You can also invest 12 points on adrenaline on headshot kill. What I would really recommend you nowadays is to go for the chance to not consume special arrows if you have many points. Then you simply increase the size of your quiver, which is really handy. Here in the warrior tab, of course, max out warrior damage if you have the points. Still 10 points on melee resistance will be absolutely enough. Max out fire damage, armor penetration, then go for damage dealt restored as health. And I know that is a very little bonus, but 4% here on all warrior abilities is better than nothing if you still have some spare points. The bad thing with all these ability points increases here is when you have an ability that deals 400% and you add 4% on that, in fact you only get a 1% increase because it will be amplified from 400 to 404, and that is a 1% increase in reality. So use these ability enhancers as a last resort if you still have points to increase your damage. In the Assassin tab we go for 20 points on damage whenever time is slowed down. That also kicks in when we use Sixth Sense and attempt to overrun mercenaries, so that gives us 10% additional damage when we overrun mercenaries. Of course we max out our Assassin damage, our damage with swords, then we also go for 10% crit chance while full health, we go for the maximum crit damage while full health and also max out damage while full health. Then we go for a couple of points here on the adrenaline stuff. We will spread out 12 points on each of the adrenaline abilities because they stack, and then they will give us more adrenaline in total. Then last but not least, damage on elites and bosses, a bit of cooldown time reduction, and also a slight bit of increase for all our assassin abilities, because that is the only mastery that will also increase our Ares Madness damage. So that's it for this video. I hope you really enjoy the new best warrior build, as I hope so. That is really cool with overrunning mercs at the same time. If you have any questions, then you can also come in our Discord and ask our experts there. Please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a like, and see you next time.